Today we're going to talk a little bit about parasites, and we're going to talk about my research and then students' research that do research under my supervisory. I have a research lab on campus called Evolutionary Ecology, and we study kind of the effects of parasites on different organisms. Okay? But before we get into that, I see some people with a pencil and paper. If you want a good book because you're like, hey, this is pretty interesting stuff. I really like to know that parasites could live in my brain and change my behavior, and that's why I'm crazy. There's a lot of cool books out there. Okay? This one by far is my favorite, Parasite Rex. Talks about all kinds of parasites that affect humans, and just simple parasites that you can get from eating sushi. How many people eat sushi? You might not after you read this book, okay? But, parasites on your brain, or The Art of Being Parasites, which is about the evolution of being parasites. Okay, so just to kind of get you warmed up, first, I want you to look into the eyes of your neighbor. You got to stare in their eyes, okay? And I'm serious. You have to do this. Or I'll tell Stacy to take all 25 points away. Okay? So look in their eyes, but concentrate on one thing. Their eyelashes. Okay? Do it now. Okay? Stare. You got to stare. Oh, you guys can't see each other's eyelashes from that far away?
I definitely.
Okay, so you can't see yours though. Okay? Okay. Did you look at least at someone's eyelashes? Please say you did. Okay? All right. Did you see it? You saw it? What did you see?
Pretty long eyelashes.
Oh, long eyelashes. Okay. What did you guys see in the back? You didn't think I was going to call on you? Come. So, can you see her eyelashes? Does she see her eyelashes? Okay, so you saw eyelashes? Everyone saw eyelashes?
Yeah.
That's good. You'd be in deep trouble if you saw this, though. Okay? Every single person in this room, actually every single person on the planet, has this parasite in your eyelashes. Actually, right at the base of your eyelash, you have Dimmerdoxis species. Normally, Facolia, which means that it burrows down in at the base, the root of your eyelash. So if we were to throw this under a microscope, you'd have been able to see the parasite on your neighbor. Okay? Everyone has them. Okay? That's what they look like. Okay? And there's no escaping this. You can wash your face 1,000 times. You'll never get rid of this guy. Okay? And it's been with us for about 4.2 million years. Okay? For as long as Homo, our genera, has been alive. Okay? And so, most of you will never know, though. Right? Some of you will wake up in the morning and you'll be like, oh, my eye itches, or it's a little inflamed along the eyelash. Okay? And that probably means that you got a huge amount of them. This is the root to your eyelash. These are the parasites that are embedded in it. Okay? And so, 80 million Americans, okay, experience complications with dermatoxis, which means that you have inflammation or something like that, your eye itches, something from that. And if you're over 70, that's not a lie. 100%. Every single person over 70 has complications, okay, with dermatoxis. Now, some of you, if you're like me and old, and I'm like, man, I still get zits. This is ridiculous. I thought you're supposed to outgrow those. You could be getting dermatoxis zits, which is another type of parasite that instead of embedding in your hair follicles, embeds in your glands of your skin, okay, and then can cause you to get a little infection and produce a pimple. Okay? So, when we talk about parasites, every single person has them. Everyone. And there's no getting around it. Now, some of them clearly are way worse than others. Right? Now, just to show you, Helpe et al. Published a paper in 2015 on Dermadoxus, okay, that little creature that lives in your eyelashes. Okay, they grabbed 100 Americans and they pulled the parasite out of their eyelashes, and then they did some genetic analysis on it. Analyzed the genetics of that parasite, and this is what they found. If you're from Europe, you're haplogroup D. That means your parasite is just like you. It evolved with you. Okay? And if you're European, it's all you. Okay? If you're South American, African, or Asian, you have a few different haplogroups that are possible to you. But we're pulling this from Americans, okay? Which means that these species traveled with us as we traveled from Europe across the ocean, or as we traveled across the Bering Strait to get here as Native Americans. Okay? Those parasites went with you. So you're never going to get rid of them. But the cool thing about that is they can show the exact track that other things show. So when we look at the genetics of people in this room, we can see that everybody's tracked back to Africa. Okay? And that the evolutionary evidence suggests that we came out of Africa. Half the groups went to Europe, the other half group went to Asia, and then over, and then into the Americas. Okay? And our parasites show the exact same track. Okay? This is more evidence of the evolution of man. Okay? So what is evolution? Someone.
It's about an organism adapting to its environment over time, pretty much.
Okay? So change over time? Yeah, so it's just genetic change over time. So you're not evolving. Okay? So as an individual, you're not actually evolving. Now, you are changing, but the key here is the population has to change. Okay? The individual change. Every single person in this room, you've already mutated many times since you were born. You have lots of mistakes in your DNA. Every time you scuff off some skin, you have to make new skin cells, you have to copy your DNA, and you make mistakes. Now, if those mistakes are carried on to the next generation, and then the next generation, and the next generation, and you change the population, then we say that population is evolving. Who's that? Charles Darwin. Right? Now, I just want to make sure that you know, Charles Darwin did not invent evolution. Okay? He didn't even coin the term evolution. His grandfather used the term evolution way before him. Okay? What Charles Darwin did is he came up with a mechanism for how evolution can occur. What was that mechanism? Natural selection. Very nice. Yeah. So we have agents of evolution, ways at which evolution can occur. Right? We can have selection. This is, Darwin's contribution to evolution, and it really comes in the form of either natural selection or sexual selection or artificial selection. We'll talk about selection a lot more. But Darwin didn't know about the rest of these. He didn't know much about migration and its influence on evolution. He knew nothing about mutation because when Darwin came up with the theory of evolution, there's no such thing as DNA. It was there, but no one knew anything about it. Okay? So you wouldn't know that there was such thing as mutations. Non-random mating, we'll get to that. Okay? And genetic drift, again, DNA-based. Okay? So these are ways at which evolution can occur. Okay? So let's talk about selection, natural selection. Most of you know something about natural selection. Okay? Pretty simple. You have a bird that's going to prey on the mice that don't match the background. They're going to decrease, and then the ones that do match the background are going to increase, right? Everybody okay with that? Pretty simple. Right? That's natural selection. It means nature is selecting for a certain phenotype or a certain adaptation. This can change over time, though, right? And does so. What if this is not black anymore? What if, the sands have moved over and this turns brown? Right? And so this was basalt at once, and now sands, light sands have came into that area. Now maybe that light mouse is at an advantage and the dark mouse is at a disadvantage. What's artificial selection?
Dogs.
Sure, dogs is a great example of artificial selection, but that's Artificial selection means we did the selecting. Okay? So look at this. All dogs come from the gray wolf. And I know this is hard to see. Okay? But every single dog on this planet, okay, that you consider a dog, okay, comes from the gray wolf. Okay? There's two lines of gray wolves. There's a European line and an Asian line. Okay? But all of them come from there. And we've made all the breeds that you can possibly think of. Okay? Golden Retriever, Chihuahua, whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay? If you want to call some of those little things that fit in your purse a dog, go for it. Okay? They're technically a dog, but they're all related to the wolf. Okay? That's their ancestor. And we can show that through genetics. Okay? We can also show that because you can take that little Chihuahua thing that fits in your purse. You can take its sperm and you can inoculate an egg from a wolf and wha-bam, you got babies. Okay? Still works, which means that they're the same species. Okay? Now, we've been doing this, breeding dogs and things like that, for about 300 years. Evolution has been working for millions of years. Okay? So the variety, I mean, most people would say, if they look at a Great Dane and then they look at a poodle, if you saw those in the wild, you'd be like, well, they're different species. Okay? I mean, they look nothing alike. Sure. 4 legs, teeth, head, okay? But nothing really. But they're the exact same species. And so the way evolution works is through natural selection or another one, which we call sexual selection. Okay? And this is also Darwin's result of Darwin's work. I'm going to show you a little video about sexual selection. Not about icons.
The bowerbird has lovingly rebuilt and redecorated his bower. Another visitor. This time it's a female. This is just where he wants her. Time to begin the show. First, he expands his pupils alternately. It's an oddly mesmerizing display. A spot of limbering up, accompanied by a weird and wheezy call from deep in his throat. Now it's time for his grand performance. He waves his wing like a matador's cape. She appears to be transfixed. This is certainly eye-catching, but it seems he needs to do more. Generously, she drops him a hint. It's the bird equivalent of a bouquet of flowers. It's all going so well, it's time to get Fizz to her chest. One final flourish to cap weeks of effort. But something's wrong. His rival is back, and at the worst possible moment. What should he do? For the female, the moment has gone. Sometimes, whatever you do, things just don't work out.
Okay, so I want you to think about that bird when you sleep, because it's cool. But think about the adaptation that bird has gone through just to try to mate with a female. Bright colors. You could see it in the forest. You couldn't see the female when they blocked the camera away. You could barely see the female. But the male stands out like a sore thumb. Okay? Predators know that males are brightly colored. And so, not only is he not camouflaged at all, he's standing there doing weird dances and weird calls trying to attract a predator and a female. Okay? So, sexual selection goes against natural selection often. We think about nature choosing organisms that are best suited, best adapted for the environment. But remember, in order for evolution to occur, you have to pass genetic information on. And the key to that is reproduction. So sometimes we see reproduction that goes way against natural selection, like this case here. Now, that brings me to kind of the research that I do. I do research on what we call the Hamilton-Ook hypothesis. These were two biologists that suggested that for an organism that has bright colors or dazzling displays or long dances or sings for a long time, that being able to show a female that you do not have parasites is an advantage. Because if a female looks at a male and says, what is that thing crawling on his neck? Right? Then she's most likely not going to mate with that individual. That means that he probably has a poor immune system and is not going to provide for her offspring. Right? And regardless of what the guys in the audience think, you don't get to choose your mate. Okay? Females choose. Males don't choose. Okay? Females drive evolution. It's not the male. Okay? You might think you get to choose, but you're wrong. Okay? And so you just will not change. It will not be the case. But look at this. Most of you guys have seen a blue jay before. Okay? This is a male blue jay. Okay? That's a male blue jay with feather lice. Okay? What female is going to choose that individual? No one. Okay? That is the Hamilton-Ook hypothesis. Okay? This is a goldfish. They have anchor worms. These aren't actually worms. They're called copepods. Okay? But same deal. Okay? That goldfish is going to be swimming next to a female. She's going to look at him and swim away. Okay? There's no way he's going to get reproduction. So it's at an advantage to males that get parasites to stick as much energy in to trying to fight off that parasite as you can. Okay? So what is a parasite? There are three different types of parasites. Endoparasites, which occur inside the organism's body. Ectoparasites, which occur outside the organism's body. And then one that we call social parasites. Some of you guys might be a social parasite. right? Your neighbor's throwing a pizza party, video games, and you're like, sweet. And you walk in, you grab a piece of pizza, and you walk out. Social parasite, okay? You just convinced them, and you didn't have to convince them because their door wasn't locked, but you convinced them to provide you resources. And there's lots of situations. And I'm going to show you another video about a very unique type of parasitism that we call brood parasitism.
So bringing up the young is a very demanding business indeed. And in most birds, it requires the full-time labour of both male and female. But one or two birds manage to avoid it altogether. And one of them is a regular visitor to this reed bed in England. A cuckoo, and she's raiding a reed warbler's nest. That's one of the reed warbler's eggs gone. And while she holds a second in her beak, shuddering with the effort, she lays one of her own. The match is near perfect. The cuckoo's is the one at the front. The reed warblers don't notice the difference and continue incubation. The cuckoo has timed her action with care. She laid her egg immediately after the female reed warbler laid the last of hers, but it develops much faster and will hatch 3 or 4 days before the legitimate eggs do. The young cuckoo, blind and naked, now deals with the remaining warbler eggs. Two weeks later, the monstrous young cuckoo is so big that it can no longer fit inside the tiny nest. Its brilliantly coloured gape, together with its call that mimics the sound of a whole brood of warbler chicks, constitute a demand for food that the warblers find irresistible. The European cuckoo's habit is so famous that we tend to think it's the only bird to behave in this way. But there are birds in half a dozen other families that do so as well. Here in Argentina, brown-hooded gulls are nesting. Gulls are so vigorous and enterprising that they might seem the last birds likely to be tricked, but on occasion they are. A duckling. Its true parents, cuckoo ducks, are far away from the nest where they dump their egg. Their offspring will never see them, just as they never saw their parents. The duckling cannot know that it's quite different from the baby gull which has now hatched out alongside it. Nonetheless, something tells it that it must not stay with this other nestling. On its very first evening, it leaves. Unlike the cuckoo, it makes no further demands on the bird that incubated it. Even though it's only a few hours old, it's perfectly capable of fending for itself.
Okay, so parasites come in lots of different forms. Okay? The ones that I'm most interested are ones that cause an energetic cost to the organism, okay? Whatever it might be. Okay, so why don't we look a little bit at the evolution and parasites. Okay, so this is a quote from Charles Darwin, okay, from his book, The Voyage of the Beagle, okay, where he recounts his attack from a Benchua or a Reduva bug, okay, when he was in Mendoza, South America. It bit him, okay, and he says a lot of very polite cuss words about this bug. Okay, if you continue to read it, which I cut out. Okay, now Charles Darwin's voyage, for those of you who don't know, he spent a lot of time in South America. Okay, and where this occurred at was right about here where the inn is on the Andes Mountain. Okay? That's where Mendoza is. Okay? And he was in a village and he got bit by a Reduva bug. Well, this is probably the insect that bit him. Everything that we know in the descriptions and the drawings that he provided for the bug, it was probably this bug. Okay? And you can see the word infestans. Okay? That's the species name. Okay? So Trypanosoma infestans, that's what it looks like. And most likely, Charles Darwin got this from this bug. Okay? So when Darwin got back from his voyage on the Beagle, he was never the same. I mean, most people just thought it was because he didn't like sailing and he spent 5 years on a boat. He had vertigo really bad. But now what we notice is that he had symptoms of Chagas disease, which is caused by this parasite, which is called Trypanosoma. Okay? And so when we further look into it, he had almost all the symptoms from Chagas disease, and he wrote about being bit by this guy. Now when we go back to this area and we sample these bugs, 75% of them have Trypanosoma. Okay? So the odds are pretty good that Darwin, the reason why he never went in public, he was always sick, he vomited almost every single day for the rest of his life after he got back from the Voyage of the Beagle, was because of Chagas disease, Trypanosoma. Okay? Now, he says it was a sin, but also a blessing, his sickness. Because if you're an individual and your entire work has to do with writing letters and writing scrupulous notes and studying things, you don't want to go out and party and socialize and things like that, and he didn't. Okay? So he says it was a blessing in disguise being sick all the time because he never went anywhere. And he just wrote and wrote and wrote and published massive amounts of material. Now, let's look at his partner, okay? Or his unofficial partner, Alfred Russel Wallace, the other person that came up with the theory of evolution by means of natural selection. That's Wallace. Okay? And what happened to Wallace? We know he had malaria. Okay? He got bit by a mosquito, developed malaria, and that is when he described the method of evolution. So both individuals that came up with evolution probably had parasites, okay? Which is not that far-fetched, since in the 1800s everyone had parasites, because in 2018 everyone has parasites. Okay? But again, when Wallace was doing his work, he did his work in Ternate. Okay? This is now Indonesia, but at the time it was called the Celebes Sea or Celebes Islands. Okay? This is malaria. There's an adult schistocyte, okay, and these are juveniles or sporocytes that occur in the red blood cells and are eating the hemoglobin. All right, so that brings me to my main research objective, and that is to study life history. Okay? So I look at what we call the energy split. Okay? You have three main things that you can put energy into, okay, throughout your lifetime. Maintenance, which is just normal energetics, so running your nerves, running your muscles, rebuilding cells. Okay? This is normal maintenance material. Okay? Growth and reproduction. Now, when you're a juvenile, this is what it looks like. some maintenance, but a ton of growth. As you mature, right, your growth goes away. Most of you are done growing, and now you're just producing reproductive parts and maintaining. Right? And for some of you, reproduction line should go way over there, like 3/4. Okay? But so reproduction and maintenance. And then as you age and you go past that reproductive age, now it's just maintenance. Okay? So my research is based on how do these pieces of the pie change when you get a parasite. So most of my research is based on fish. So I'm an ichthyologist, a fish biologist. Okay? And one of the species of fish that I like to study, mainly because they got tons of parasites, and they're everywhere, is white suckers. It's not people. Okay? It's actual fish. Okay? Okay? But here it is. Okay? This is an example of white sucker. Okay? Here's two separate individuals. Okay? This guy, you can see all those little teeny black spots on it. That parasite's called black spot. Awesome, huh? Okay? So that's a trematode that injects itself into the fish, and then the fish encapsulates it, okay? And the fish has to fight off this parasite. Now, this guy's just loaded with it. Okay? This one, none. So if we look at the pieces of the pie, okay, this is what we see. We see parasitized has a huge amount of maintenance. Okay? It's got to maintain tissues and maintain energy because this parasite's taking that energy away. So what happens, maybe in this case you could see, these are the exact same age, by the way. Okay? So these are both 4-year-old fish, okay? And these are actual pictures to scale, okay? Except for blown up, big, okay? So the fish ain't really that big. Okay, but growth and reproduction. So what we see is fish that have lots of parasites, they stop growing early. Okay? They just mature super fast and start reproduction as soon as possible. Okay? What we see with normal fish, that's not the case. They try to get as big as they can, then switch over to reproduction, so their reproduction is more potent, have higher ability, produce more eggs, and I'll show you that. So the parasite you just saw has this life cycle. Okay? So the host, the main host, is what we call a heron, or it could be any bird that eats fish. So you can have blue herons, you can have white herons, cattle egrets. You have all kinds of birds that would eat a fish, okay? And then they're going to defecate out eggs that hatch in water and become metacidium. They inject themselves into a snail. Okay? Now this is cool because when they embed themselves into a snail, they go right for the reproductive parts of the snail. And they trick the snail into thinking that it's pregnant. And then the snail just starts eating everything it can to try to raise these babies that it's making, but it's not its babies, it's spore cysts. And so this parasite just eating up all that energy and then bursts out of the snail, destroying the snail, and injects itself into a fish. And then the fish encapsulates it, and the heron eats the fish, and the life cycle continues on and on and on. Okay, so this is my research. I'm going to show you some of the things that we collect. At the end, I'll give credit to lots and lots of people, okay, because this is a seine, okay, and it takes 2 people to pull it, okay, believe it or not. I'm trying to seine by myself there. Not really, but okay, it's not possible to seine by yourself. So that's why I have a lot of student names. I have a lot of people that do research with me. It's mainly because I haven't figured out a good way to pull this by myself. Okay. There is one of those white suckers. I'm doing what we call a heart puncture. Okay, so for some organisms, like fish, you can stick a needle right into their heart, pull off blood, throw them back in the water, and they'll swim away. Okay? Perfectly fine. They heal before they even hit the water, which should make sense to you, right? Because if a fish gets a cut under the water, they better have a really good clotting mechanism. Otherwise, it will bleed out. Right? And they do. Right? And so they can clot extremely fast. Okay? Then I euthanize them, some of them. Okay? So I throw them in a bucket with some formalin. Okay? And then this is what their egg mass looks like. So that's the body of the fish, and that came out of it. Okay? We're talking 500,000 to 1 million eggs these fish are producing, okay? At least when they don't have parasites. Okay? This is the brain of the fish. Okay, so I take the skull off, and then right down here in these cavities are what we call otoliths. They're ear bones. And what you can do with that ear bone is you can age the fish. And that's another important piece, because maybe I have a really big fish in one river and then a really small fish in another river. But without aging them, you don't know if they're the same age. If one is just really small because it has lots of parasites or is eating a poor diet, what's going on? So you have to have a way to age them. And we can age them to the year, okay, by looking at otoliths. Okay? Look at diet also. So diet can tell you, are they switching their diet? So if they got parasites, do they eat something else? Or because they ate something, are they getting parasites? Sushi lovers. And here are some of the parasites. I showed you Chagas disease in humans. This is Trypanosoma. It's also found in fish. Okay? Now, you might say, what are these things? Well, maybe you won't say that. Okay? But these are red blood cells, because fish have nucleated red blood cells. If you remember the picture of the human red blood cells, our blood cells don't have nuclei. So your red blood cells don't have any DNA. Okay? But all other organisms on the planet do have DNA. So all other organisms except for mammals. Okay? And so here's Trypanosoma. That's a really cool parasite. When it gets in, it eats your red blood cells and your white blood cells. That's not the cool part. There's lots of parasites that do that. Okay? But then, when your immune system tries to fight it off, it switches its protein coating. So it switches the outside coating, so your immune system is pointless. And it can't fight it off. And if you get Trypanosoma, called African sleeping sickness, you will die unless you get treatment for it. Okay? If you ignore it. You'll notice, though, you'll sleep like 24 hours a day. You'll notice something's wrong. Okay? So here's that black spot. Here's an internal parasite. This is inside their gut. These are called hookworms. Okay, so there's lots of different parasites that are found on these guys. Okay, so you can ignore all the statistical mumbo-jumbo. It's very complex, and if you want to talk about Akiiki's information criteria, that's what that is right there. We can talk about it later. Okay? But really what I do is I build big models with lots of information in it, and then try to figure out which one best predicts things like GSI. In this case, gonadosomatic index, or how much reproductive parts for the body size. So how much of that fish is eggs? How much of that bird is eggs? How much of that lizard is eggs? That's a gonadosomatic index. Okay? And so what I do is build these giant models with interacting variables and try to predict. Okay? So an AIC of 0 is the best model. Okay? Anything that's less than 2 is good. And so you can see that certain things are going to predict the GSI of females. So how much eggs they have in their body, or how much sperm a male has. Okay? And when I see things like dipterans, that's diet. But when I see things like trichopods, that's a parasite. So that tells me this parasite's having a negative effect on that fish's GSI. Same thing over here when I see intestinal parasites. Okay? Same thing, negative effect on them. Okay? We can look at other measures, like how much fat do they have in their body, which you would expect. If you have parasites, you're not going to be very fat. And that's what we see. We see different parasites here. Tri is a different type of parasite. Chi is a different type of parasite. So depending on the species, okay, different parasites affect them in different ways. Okay? And even further than that, we can look at their blood. And we can look at white blood cell counts. And we can look at heterophil lymphocyte ratios, which are just two types of white blood cells. Heterophils are the parasites that are the white blood cells that are going to come in, and they're going to engulf something that's foreign. Okay? So they're the first line of defense. And then lymphocytes, okay, are the ones that you are most familiar with, which we call T cells, killer T cells. Okay? And they're going to have memory, and they're going to attack things that the fish has already experienced, or the bird or the mammal. Okay? And what you can see here is fish that are infected with parasites. So here, 100% in this river system infected with parasites. And you can see that they have high H/L ratios, meaning that they're building an immune response to these things. So at what cost, though? Are they smaller? Are they reproducing earlier? Okay? And that's what my research is mainly about. Okay? Another piece of my research is to look at behavior. Okay? So this is an experiment. These are all control, meaning they don't have parasites. Experimental means they have an external parasite, which I stuck on them. Okay? Yes, brutal. Okay? And then I put them in a tank and I look at where they spend their time in the water column. And look at this. If you have a parasite, external parasite, you're almost at the surface constantly. What's at the surface? Oxygen. Okay? So that's a key one. Oxygen. Also, temperature is warmer at the surface. Okay? But what's at the surface if it's an external parasite that you don't want if you're a fish? Predators. Okay? So this is probably what's going on is this fish is inducing a fever just like we would if you got a parasite. Okay? Your body would induce a fever. But fish don't have the capability of using energy to induce a fever. So they have to do it behaviorally. Okay? So they're probably inducing a fever, but as they're doing that, they're moving to the surface, and now they're getting picked off by predators. And that keeps that cycle going. All right, so on campus, I do a lot of research with lizards. So this is sagebrush lizard. Okay. That is the fingers of one of my students, Sarah Bailey. Okay. This is her noosing a lizard. Okay. She's not killing it. Okay. You just take a little fishing pole and some line, and you just grab it around the neck. That's the best way to catch a lizard. And lo and behold, guess what? They have malaria on this campus. Okay. So there are malaria sporocytes inside the red blood cells of the lizards. So what does it mean for the lizards? Well, it means that large lizards, based on our data, large lizards have more plasmodium, more malaria than small lizards. They also have much higher levels of white blood cells, which you would expect, right? They're trying to fight off this infection. But as a part of that, they also have a much bigger liver mass. Okay? And if you know something about malaria, that's what malaria does. Malaria comes into you from a bite, mainly of a mosquito. Okay? But we're not sure about lizards because lizards don't get bit by mosquitoes. Okay? Lizards rarely get bit by mosquitoes. We actually think the vector for this is a tick. Okay? But we're not entirely sure. We're working on that. Okay? But nonetheless, it comes into you, and that sporocyte goes to your liver, and it matures in your liver, okay? Which would cause your liver to swell with parasites. And then it bursts out of your liver and eats all your red blood cells. So I've been studying birds on campus, parasites. So there are a bunch of students capturing birds in a net, okay, painting their toenails, which is fun. Okay, this is for recapturing them. So we'll check to see, all right, they had parasites this time of year. Can they get rid of them? Okay? As it gets cooler, do they get more parasites, less parasites, these kind of things? There's a bird in a net. Okay. I also do it with raptors off of campus. So I catch things like kestrels, okay, and pelicans. Okay? The most disgusting species on the planet. Well, maybe. Okay? But if you look, this is a pelican with its mouth open. It's kind of hard to see. Okay? But you can see these little things that are sticking there. Those are called pouch lice. Okay? So they have these parasites inside their mouth, okay, that eat up leftover food and things like that. And so we look at, well, how are these pouch lice affecting these species? Is it causing them to reproduce less eggs, have poor immune system, less lifespan, etc.? Okay? All right. So with that, I have lots of collaborators all over the country and tons of students that have worked on things with me and researchers that work on things with me. So if you have questions, we have time for some questions, I think, and I'll take some questions about research or not. Yeah?
Okay. So do you do much on mammals like humans?
Okay, so the question is, do I do much on mammals like humans?
Yeah.
So the problem with doing research on humans, as most people know, who do research is there's a lot of red tape with humans. Okay, so normally what I do, so I work, I have Embry funding, which is biomedical funding. So normally what I do is I do research on mammals a little bit, but normally I do research on things that could either be zoonotic, meaning that it's a species of disease or parasite that could affect humans. Okay, so like malaria in the case of lizards, well, we have malaria. Trypanosoma in the case of fish, well, we have trypanosoma. So if we can know what the effects on fish and lizards, then we can pretty much assume that the effects on humans are going to be very similar. Yeah?
Are some parasites beneficial? Any?
So yeah, I mean, so the question is, are some parasites beneficial? So that's a loaded question. It depends on if you consider a child in the womb a parasite. Okay? For the women that have been pregnant, absolutely, most of them. Yeah, well, under the definition of parasite, it feeds off of another organism without killing them, then yeah, it's beneficial because you're passing on your DNA. But most parasites are not detrimental to an organism unless it's coupled with something else. So in the case of like lizards that have malaria, what our other research has shown that the lizards that are on campus that have malaria are the ones that are most affected are the ones that are most involved with foot traffic. So the ones that occur on the track have much higher levels of malaria than ones that occur off, where there are no tracks and there's no human contact. And it could be because all the little kids are running around chasing them. They're expending their energy to try to get away from them. It could be that there's more predators, more trees. We don't really know. It could just be that people walk by and every time you walk by, they move and they're expending energy versus a lizard that's off. So it's not that a parasite could be necessarily beneficial. Now there are some that probably started off as being parasites that are now beneficial types of relationships. So for example, if you think about coral reefs, coral is an animal called a polyp. Okay? And inside their cells, they have beneficial algae that they've captured, so it allows them to do photosynthesis. Now, the original relationship probably was that algae was forming on there and maybe consuming the material of the polyp, and then eventually it encapsulated, and now they're a symbiotic situation. So some parasitism could eventually become symbiotic, but the definition of being a parasite is that you're feeding off of another individual. So you're taking stuff away from them. Other questions? All righty. You betcha.